Today is the last message of this current four-part series on what it means to trust God. So far, we've looked at three major aspects of God. God is joy, and to trust in God is to trust that joy comes. Even though the day may be dark or the storm may be great, that joy comes, and we know it comes. And to trust God is to trust that the joy comes. And God is also peace. God is the peace in our souls. God is the peace that God has left there. It's the assurance that we don't have to have a troubled heart or a fearful mind. All we need to do is to find the God within, and we shall have the peace we need. And then, God, of course, is love. God is comfort. God is encouragement. God is confirmation of His love. And so, when we trust God, we trust all of these things. We trust the joy. We trust the peace. We trust the love. But today, I want to talk about one final aspect of God that we really, really need to learn how to trust. People say, well, you've talked about joy, you've talked about peace, you've talked about love. What else could there be? One more thing. Oneness. God is oneness. This is the point of our message today. And it's what we will now ask God to help us to understand. Let us have a prayer of preparation. Lord, we're so thankful for this opportunity to study your word, but help us to understand what it means to trust the oneness that is you. Help us to know the meaning of that and how it should shape our life. Give us a vision. Give us an understanding. Give us a picture of who we are meant to be. For we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Our focus verse for the message today is that last verse from the gospel reading this morning, verse 40 out of the 25th chapter. The answer that Jesus gives to those who say, when did we see you hungry and thirsty and naked and a stranger and sick and in prison? And he says to them, listen to me, I'm going to tell you the truth right this minute. Whatever you have done to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you have also done unto me. If ever there was a statement that summarizes the oneness that is God, it is that statement. And that's why I saved it till the last message for this series. Because I think this aspect of God speaks loudly to our current world. If ever there was a time in human history when the world was broken and shattered into pieces like we have never seen before, it is our current time. Brokenness is everywhere and in every form or fashion throughout the entire world do we see this. And so a message about the oneness of God is a very, very important message for us to hear in the world in which we live today. It's kind of like the experience I designed for some young people at a retreat we were having one time. We had about 100 young people there, and we gathered them into the fellowship hall, and there was a huge table we had set up, and all of them gathered around it. And then I brought in a box that had in it one of those 1,000 pieces jigsaw puzzles. I don't know if you've ever tried to do one of those. And I dumped it onto the table. 2 or 3 times to dump it onto the table. 1,000 pieces, all broken in all kinds of different directions. And I told them, said, now we have only 2 hours left to put this puzzle together. They were terrified. How can we do that? What hope do we have? They felt kind of like Humpty Dumpty. That took a great fall. And all the king's men and all the king's Tarsus could not put him back together again. This is kind of what our world is like. It's not a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. It's an 8 billion-piece jigsaw puzzle. Broken into millions and millions of different pieces. Billions of people all pursuing their own dreams. Billions of people looking for their own answers. Billions of people trying to put the world together the way they think it should be put together. That's called Humpty Dumpty despair. And that's what we have today. So a message about the oneness of God is an important message for all Christian people, especially around the world, to hear that it's the oneness of God that will save us from this brokenness that we have. So, if we would think about it for a moment, what does it mean, this idea, the oneness of God? Well, it's an idea that presents to us the fact, as our gospel lesson points out, that if one of us hurts, the whole human race hurts. Amen. If one of us is separated from the others, then the whole human race is separated from one another. To say that God is one is to say that God is one with all of us, and all of us are one with God. The universe in which we live is like a huge body, like your own body. Your own body is a one-thing entity. And if your little toe hurts, the rest of you hurts. You see? That's the nature of the universe in which we live. It's a universe of a one God. Why do you think when Jesus was asked what he thought the greatest commandment was, that he chose Deuteronomy chapter 6? Why did he choose that particular commandment? Do you know that commandment? You know how it begins. I think it's because of the way it begins that he chose that. Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 1 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one." And it goes on to say we should love God with all our heart and soul and mind and things of that nature. But the primary proclamation is that God is one. You see, at the time of Jesus, people had real trouble believing in a oneness. They had real trouble in believing in one God. First of all, they had all kinds of gods. They had a pantheon full of gods. God of weather, God of the river, God of war, God of fertility, whatever. They had hundreds of gods. But the faith of Jesus says, no. This reality is not a brokenness. This reality is a unity. Say that one more time. This reality is not a brokenness. It's a unity. And the unity is God. The Lord is one, and there's only one. And that should say to us that we are part of that oneness. God is part of that oneness. We are part of that oneness. And what it is to say that is, if you are to trust God, you are to trust that reality is a unity. That reality is a oneness. That we are all joined together. Whether we like it or not, we are all joined together. One Lord, one baptism, one faith. That's the way it is. That's the way it is throughout all the universe. That we should understand this is very, very important. And so, the question we should ask ourselves as we prepare to think about this is a very important question. People say, well, preachers always ask people if they believe in God or not. Well, that's not what we really do. If we're really truly a preacher, that's not what we do. It's like Jesus said, even the demons believe in God. We're not asking people to believe in God. We're asking to believe in the oneness that is God. You see? That's what we're asking. Do you really believe in the oneness that is God? Until you believe in that, until you understand that, then you are part of the separateness. You're part of the divisiveness. You're part of the brokenness. And that is not a solution we need. We need for everyone to be part of the solution of unity. Bringing the human race together as one, as we have meant to be from the beginning of time, as God created us to be. There's only God and only us, and that's all there is. And if we are to have a world in which we can all live in peace and joy, then this is what we must do. We must believe in the oneness, not in separateness. But today, the idea of believing in separateness has taken over in our world. No longer do we believe in a oneness. We believe in our vision of the world. We believe in our understanding of reality. We believe in what we think is right. And as long as we do that, this world will perish. It will perish. It cannot exist this way. So we have to give up all of our individualistic understandings of what is right and what is wrong. We have to give up all of our individualistic judgments of whether this is the way your life should be or whether it should not be this way. And instead we should focus upon one thing and one thing only, and that is what we can do to bring that unity back together again. That's the way of the Christian. Is the one who says, I'm here to save this world by being part of the solution of unity. And any disagreements, any idea that I'm right and someone else is wrong must go away. Must go away. Otherwise, our days are not long, and they are numbered. So, therefore, it's very important then for us to explore what it really means to be like, to be someone who trusts in this oneness that is God, this oneness that we all are, that all of us are part of it, and every person is our responsibility, and every person looks upon us as their responsibility. This oneness that God means us all to enjoy and trust. This is what we must explore. We must understand what kind of life it would be like if we lived that way, if we really believed in oneness. And of course, this parable of the sheep and the goats gives us the perfect picture of what that life looks like. The person that believes in oneness is the person who dedicates their life to feeding the hungry and giving drink to the thirsty, to clothing the naked and welcoming the stranger, and to visiting the sick and in prison and setting them free. This is what a person who believes in the oneness of humanity does. And so today I'd like to share with you just briefly these three ideas of what a life looks like if you are a person that truly trusts that God is one and that you are part of that oneness, and everybody else on the face of this earth is part of that oneness. What would that kind of life look like? So let's explore that together today. There are these three categories. Each one of them is very broad. We could talk about each one of them for hours, actually. But we shall talk about them briefly. And hopefully then you will remember this parable and you will think about what you're doing, what you're involved in that would be like that activity in that category. The first category is what I call the weak. In this world, there's two kinds of people, the weak and the strong. That's basically the way it's always been. And probably always will be. Now, in this passage today, the weak are identified as the hungry and the thirsty. The weak is that spectrum of hunger and thirst. That's a big spectrum. Unfortunately, we always kind of narrow it down just to those people who don't have any physical food to eat or who don't have any clean water to drink. Well, yes, of course, they are hungry. And of course, they are thirsty. But it's a broad category. There's a lot of other kinds of hunger besides hunger for food. There's hunger for meaning. There's hunger for purpose. There's hunger for love. There's hunger for joy. There's hunger for peace. There's all kinds of hunger in this world. The hungry and the thirsty is a large, large, large category of people, not just the physically hungry. It's the physically hungry and the spiritually hungry and everything in between. And the same is true of the thirsty. Thirsty doesn't just mean that you don't have some water to drink or some clean water. It means that you have this unquenchable need for something in your life that will make you have a sense of well-being, something that will refresh you, something that will help you get through all the dark, difficult days you face. You can be very thirsty and have a refrigerator full of something to drink, you see. It's a large category, the hungry and the thirsty. But what that does, what hunger and thirst always does, is it makes you famished and it makes you perishing. That's what hunger and thirst does. And there are millions, if not billions, of people in this world that are famished and who are perishing because their hungers are not being met and because their thirst is not being met. And it's not just those physically hungry, and it's not just those spiritually hungry. It's all the people in all the world that fall into that category. We might even fall into that category, you see. So, a person who believes in oneness says, I must do whatever I can to feed the hungry and to give something to drink to the thirsty. Whoever they are in my life, whatever form they might take, this is something I must do. This is something because I believe in the oneness. If one person in our world is hungry, then I'm hungry. If one person is thirsty, I'm thirsty. And if one person is hungry, God is hungry. If one person is thirsty, God is thirsty. We must do something about this hunger and thirst. This is what it means to believe in oneness and not to believe in separateness. Not my problem, not my deal. I don't do those kinds of things. That kind of attitude will just leave us to die. But the attitude I'm trying to preach about today is the one who says, no, I believe in oneness, and I believe we're all part of God, and we're all part of that oneness that is God, and it's my responsibility to do what I can do. So what can you do for the hungry? And what can you do for the thirsty? What can you do for them? Well, gosh, the list could go on and on of the things we could do. But what it all adds up to is one thing. Give them whatever strength you have. We've all got some kind of strength. Yeah, we do. We don't realize it, but we all have some kind of strength. Maybe all we've got is a few little dollars in our hands. Well, that's a strength. That dollar will buy a sandwich for somebody who doesn't have something to eat that day. Or maybe we're filled with the joy of the Holy Spirit and we know what it means to live eternally. Well, that strength will do some good for the hungry and the thirsty as well. So there's no telling what kind of strength you might have. But whatever it is, use it to feed the hungry and to give something to drink to the thirsty, whether it be physical or spiritual. All of us have something. That's one of the things these young people learned from the jigsaw puzzle event. They would all, with surprise, when they looked into their hand and they had a piece that matched somebody else's piece, and they would rejoice. You see, that's how the world's problems will be solved. When the strength you have matches the weakness others have, then there's joy in the world. Amen. I've experienced this in my ministry so many ways, and when I was writing and putting this message together, I thought, what example can I use? And it was so confusing because I had so many examples I could use. But the one that came to my mind is the most current one that's going on right now in my life, and that's when Rebecca and I go out to deliver these sandwiches to the street family, we call them now, because we know these people and we know their children's names, and we become kind of a family. But when we go out to distribute our sandwiches and our boiled egg and our drink that we give them, it's a tremendous experience. And it came to me as I was looking for an illustration, this could not be a more perfect one of what it feels like to give your strength to someone else. It's wonderful. One of the things that we normally think about this kind of a ministry is we think that the people are hungry and we think that they're wanting to have something to eat that day. And I thought that at first. And we would hand them the sandwich, and many of them would open it right there and start eating it because they were so hungry. They didn't have any breakfast that morning. They didn't have supper the night before. But as we serve these people, I see that they have an even greater desire than just their hunger. And what that desire is that they are thirsty. They've been standing out on that street corner since the beginning of rush hour at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they've not had a drop to drink. And I'm the one in the team that brings the 5-liter jug and the cups. And I hand out the cup to them, and we start to pour the juice into that cup. And they can't even wait for the cup to get filled before they start drinking it. And some of them drink it up so fast that they hope they can have another cup before we leave to go on down the street and find someone else. But what came to my mind was the experience of watching that juice flow into that cup. It takes about 7 seconds to fill up a cup. But it seems like the whole world stops. The people in the traffic stopped at the traffic light. Watch. The people holding the cup, watch. I'm watching as well. And it's like you can hear the angels sing. Because a thirsty person is getting something to drink. This is what our world needs from all of us. Not just to give a thirsty beggar or a homeless person something to drink, but to give those people who are famished and who are dying inside because they can't find anything that satisfies their thirst in life. All of us have something in our souls that we can give them, something to refresh them. This is my point. When it comes to this category of the weak, the hungry, and the thirsty, we who are called to believe in the oneness of God, we give our strength in order to be a refreshment to the rest of the world. That's how I would like to think of myself, and I hope that you would like to think of yourself that way. Today I want to be a refreshment to others. In whatever way or whatever form that takes, today I want to be a refreshment to them. And that is how we feed the hungry and give something to drink to the thirsty. Well, there's another category that's just as important, and it's one that we also need to be focused upon as well. This is the category of the vulnerable people. Vulnerable people are described here in the parable as the naked and the stranger. The stranger and the naked is the order in which it comes. These are the vulnerable people. And again, it's a wide spectrum. It's not just the stranger, and it's not just the one that has no clothes. It's those who have no community, those who are marginalized, those who are rejected by the rest of the human community. These are the strangers, the people who we do not want to associate with, or if we associate with them and we find out who they're really like, we then don't want to associate with them. These are the strangers. And then the naked are not just those who don't have enough clothing to wear. These are the people who are vulnerable to the pains and the sufferings of the world. They may not have a job. They may have an addiction. They may have all kinds of other problems. That's what it means to be naked. It means to be vulnerable. It means to be almost destroyed by the horrible things that go on in this world. These people are the vulnerable people. And if one person is vulnerable in our world, then we're all vulnerable. This is the idea of believing in oneness. If one person in our world is not accepted, does not feel loved, does not feel as if they're part of a community, then we have no community in this world. We have no hope in this world of ever saying that we do. What we have then are tribes of people that love each other, but not the rest of the world. And that's never going to solve any problems that we have. So this category of the vulnerable, those who are unwelcomed, who are without community, and those who are attacked on every side by all kinds of things that would destroy them. They have no protection. They have no protection against it. They've been taken over by it. These are the people that we must do something about. These are also part of the brokenness that goes on in our world. Again, I had so many examples I could share, but the one that came to my mind was something that happened to me back when I was doing an internship. We were required to go to a church while we were still in seminary and study with a pastor and see how they did what they did. And then, in that 3-month internship, we had to go find another pastor in the city, or actually these were already found for us, and we were told which pastor to go to, and we would go out and see what they did. And the subject of the internship was evangelism. How do you do evangelism? How do you bring people to Christ? What does that really mean? And so they divided us up among the pastors that had volunteered to help. The pastor that I went to, his name was John. He was a Pentecostal minister. And he was starting a program of evangelism in East Houston, which is a very poverty overcome area, very poor, wretched place. At least back in those days it was. And he and his wife Dodie were starting a ministry there in their little apartment in the midst of primarily African American communities, a few Latin communities. And so I went to visit with John and his wife, and they were very welcoming to me, and they were so excited that I was going to be a pastor, and they wanted to do what they could to help. And their apartment was so small, and it was a little bitty place, that they gathered people together to start this movement of evangelism. And so John was excited about it, and he wanted to tell me all about his plans for the future and how he believed that persons needed to be loved of God, and that that's what he wanted to show people was the love of God. And I had no trouble with that. I said, that sounds like a great thing. I'd like to see how you do it and what you're about. So I went to the first Bible study prayer meeting that they had, and I was shocked because I had been used to the upper middle class white United Methodist churches. Well, this was not that kind of a place. This was the poor of the poor. These people, many didn't even have shoes to wear. I couldn't believe in Houston, Texas, they didn't even have shoes to wear. Some of those gathered there that night, you could tell their clothes were like 2 sizes too big, and they didn't match because they got them out of some bag that somebody had dropped off. 2 or 3 of them smelled of alcohol and were obviously alcoholics suffering. One of them was swatting imaginary flies all night long. Most of them had no teeth, or what teeth they had were rotting. These were broken people, marginalized people. These were people that most people didn't care a thing about. And, you know, I kept saying to myself, being I was a young pastor studying ministry, I kept saying to myself, how in God's name are you ever going to build a church with these people? They can barely even get here, let alone be of any use. You know, I was young and immature back in those days. But that's the feeling I had. But what happened that night changed my view of evangelism forever, and I still have it to this day. John and his wife Dodie, they would go to each one of those people and they would pray for them. And it wasn't just a quick little prayer. They would pray for them for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, while the rest of us sit there and listen. And they prayed for those people, the alcoholics, those with no teeth, those with no shoes. They prayed for them like they were the most special people in the world. And I'm sure they felt that way. Touched by the love. And I thought to myself, this must be what it's all about. This must be what this world needs. This overwhelming welcoming and accepting of others despite the fact that they may be of no use to the human race, despite the fact that they might be alcoholic or addictive, despite the fact that they might be so poor they can't even afford shoes, despite the fact of all of that, to accept them and to love them as if they are children of the King. That's what John and Dodie did. And as I was there for 3 months, I saw that little group grow from about 6 or 7 people up to about 35 people, 40 people. Too big for that little apartment. So it wasn't long that John and Dodie decided to move into a feed and seed store. They could use it at night, and it was more room for more people to come. Now they called it John's house. That's what they called this place, was John's house. And everybody in the community knew you could go to John's house and feel loved and feel accepted. No matter what kind of a stranger you might be, no matter how unclothed you might be, you could go to John's house and feel like somebody. And John told me one night, he said, you know, what we're trying to do here in East Houston is create an oasis of love. Well, those of you who've gone to Houston know what became of the Oasis of Love. It became one of the biggest churches in Houston. And eventually became known as Lakewood Church after John passed away. But that's where I learned about evangelism. It's sharing with people that they are accepted unconditionally. We don't care whether you are of use to us or not of use to us. We don't care whether you believe right or don't believe right. We don't care about any of that. You are accepted here, and we will pray for you. That kind of evangelism will change the world, and that kind of evangelism is what we need if we are to take care of the strangers and if we are to take care of those who have no clothes. This is what it means. Accept them. Accept them. Welcome them. Let them know that they are no longer the unwanted and that they are no longer the unclothed. Well, finally, there's one more category that I must speak about today. And that's this last category of the burdened people. Not only do we have the weak people, not only do we have the vulnerable people, but the human race has the burdened people. This is what causes our brokenness, is our weaknesses, it's our oppression, it's our burdens, it's all of these things together. This is what breaks us up. And the last category we have are the burdened people. In our passage today, they are described as the sick and those that are in prison. These are the burdened people, the unwell and the unfree. You see, there's all kinds of people that fit that category. Of course, there are those who are physically sick. Yes, many of those. But there's also those who have no sense of well-being. They have no peace. They have no joy. They're sick spiritually. And likewise, there's people in prison. People that are actually physically incarcerated in prison. Yes, there are those people. But there are those people who are unfree, who are trying to live lives that someone told them they should live, who are trying to live the way they think they should live, people that are in the prisons they've created for themselves. So you see, from a physical to a spiritual, it's a large spectrum, and it breaks up our humanity. And so we must do something to relieve those who are sick and those who are in prison. And just like when we have those who are in need of our acceptance, and we have those who are in need of our refreshment, the burdened people, they are in need of our hope. You see, hope is what we can give people. We can give sick people hope, regardless of what kind of sickness they might have. And we can give people in prison hope, regardless of what kind of prison they are in. Another experience I had when I was in the ministry, associate pastor at a large United Methodist church, I was given the task of being the hospital visitor. They felt it would be good for a young pastor to do that. And so that's what I did. 3 days a week I visited the hospitals there in Austin. There were 3 major hospitals that we went to visit. And it was understood that this was part of my ministerial training, to learn how to visit people in the hospital, to visit the sick. And so I did it, because that's what they said we were to do. And the way it worked was, you would go into the reception area of the hospital. Now this was back in the 70s. Probably today they would never do such a thing. But back in those days, they kind of respected clergymen. And you could go to the front desk and identify yourself as a clergyman, and they would give you a little badge that said clergyman. And then they would give you a 3x5 box. And in that box you would open it up and there would be a bunch of 3x5 cards, all divided according to known denominations. You had Methodists, you had Presbyterians, you had Baptists, you had Catholics, you had Episcopalians, and you could thumb through those cards. Of course, my job was to find the Methodists. And you find the Methodists. And there would usually be maybe 5 or 6 in each hospital. And so the routine was, you got the card out, you took down their name, you took down their room, you went by and paid a visit. Told them you were a Methodist pastor and how they were doing, and you'd have a little prayer with them. And that's what we did, week after week after week. But it bothered me, because it never seemed authentic. It never seemed real. It seemed like it was an obligation. It seemed like it was a job. It seemed like it was something that I was to do. And of course they were appreciative, yes, and nice, yes. But it lacked some kind of power. And eventually it really got to me, and I hated to see the 3x5 box. Because something in my heart said this is not the way it should be done. And so I finally got my badge one day and I ignored the 3x5 box. Not going to look in there. I'm just going to wander off into the hospital and see if I can find anybody that needs prayer today. Yeah. And as it was, I was led down into the emergency room, waiting room. Boy, if there ever was a place where people needed prayer, now that was it. And over the next few weeks, I learned how to see those who were crying or those who were just shell-shocked by the fact that their young daughter had been run over by a truck and was in the emergency room. And I began to think to myself, if anybody needs prayer, it's these people who need prayer. And so I would slowly but surely, I learned how to sit down next to them, make eye contact, share with them that I was a pastor, I'd like to pray with them, and most of them would grab my hand. Oh, do pray for me. Now those prayers were some of the most real prayers I ever prayed in my life. They were, because there was a need there. There was a hunger there. These people were in that situation where they needed that hope that prayer offered them. These were the people that were unwell because of the problems in their life. They felt no sense of well-being, or they felt like they were in the prison of their own fear and the prison of their own anxiety. And what I was able to do through those prayers was to present to them the idea that there's hope, always hope. Maybe we don't understand it right now, but there's always hope. And so it was an enriching experience to me. And I came away from that really understanding that what people in this world need, they need it when they need it. Not because some 3x5 box says they need it. It's because they need it. And there's lots of people in this world today that need hope. Let me tell you, lots of people, lots and lots of people. You heard prayer requests this morning of people asking for hope. So if there's anything we can do to help people have hope, whether it's somebody that's sick with some kind of a problem that needs surgery, or somebody who has no sense of well-being, whoever it might be, we can do something to bring hope to them. So you see, what I've done here this morning is to present to you what we can do if we really believe in oneness. We can come to these people who are hungry and thirsty, and we can refresh them by giving our strength to them. And we can come to these people who need our acceptance, who are strangers in their own world, who are unclothed and vulnerable. We can give them our acceptance. We can be their blanket. We can be their protection. We can be the ones who bring them into the human race and make them part of our oneness. And likewise, those who are sick, those who are in prison, those who are unwell, those who have no sense of well-being, those who are in prisons of their own making, we can give them hope that those things do not last and that they will be one day well and one day free from these things. This is what we can do, but we've got to believe in oneness. If you don't believe in oneness, then you say, why should I do all that? What difference does it make to me? Well, if you want to continue to live in this world, it could make a big difference, let me tell you, as time progresses. Each little thing we do adds up. They call it the butterfly effect. They say if a butterfly flies in Brazil, it affects the weather in Alaska. That's what they say, the scientists. It's like that. Whatever you can do, do it. And this world will be more one than it's ever been before. When I was studying in college, I had a little part-time job working as a gas attendant at a FEMA gas station. Do you ever remember the FEMA gas station? Yeah, I worked at a FEMA station for a while. And the owner was a man I consider to be old. He was probably in his late 50s. At that time, I thought he was an old man. Matter of fact, we called him Old Man Jenkins. And he'd leave it to us to run the station during the day, on the weekends especially. But at night, he would always show up before the shift ended. And we had an old cash register, one of those kind you punch and the door comes open and all of that. And every time he came, every evening, he would come in and he'd sit down there at the desk where the cash register was, and I knew exactly what he was going to say because he said it every time. He said, well, boy, let's see what you did for me today. And he'd start counting the cash to see the difference between the cash that was in the cash register and the cash that was in there now. And that showed how much I did for him that day. And if it was a good number, he was happy. If it was a bad number, he was not happy. But what I'm saying that about is to say, this is God's way. Every day he comes into our life and says, what have you done for me today? That's what God does. He comes in to look at the cash register. He comes in to look at what you've done to add to the unity of the world today. Who have you fed that was hungry? Who have you given water to that was thirsty? Who have you clothed that was naked? Who have you welcomed that was a stranger? Who was sick have you visited? Who was in prison that you helped to set free? This is what it adds up to. And it will be added up. This is what God does. Because God is interested in seeing us become the oneness that we were meant to be. And that's what God is working on. And that's what we who preach the gospel are attempting to get people to join in and do. Because when you become someone who has decided that I believe in oneness, I don't believe in brokenness, when you become that kind of a person, then you will understand what Jesus meant when he said, whatever you have done to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you've done unto me. Amen. Amen. Let's rise for our closing hymn.